Good evening. Welcome to Democratic Television, a show where we discuss current events and issues that impact democratic values. My name is Lisa Plauchin. We have a special show for you this evening, where we will be honoring a historic leader and community activist, Reverend Harold Middlebrook. Reverend Middlebrook was recently awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award at the KCDP Truman Day dinner. Tonight, we will share this momentous occasion with you. You will hear an endearing introduction by LaKenya Middlebrook, Reverend Middlebrook's daughter. You will see Reverend Middlebrook humbly accept this award and hear his moving remarks. We will also share audience members' impressions and how they felt by this inspiring receipt of the award. And finally, we will close with a very personal father-daughter interview between Reverend Middlebrook and LaKenya, culminating the end of the evening. Sit back and enjoy this DTV exclusive, a tribute to Reverend Harold Middlebrook.
Which speaker really stood out to you?
Well, they all stood out to me in so many different ways. Certainly, Reverend Middlebrook's getting the Lifetime Achievement Award.
You know, the event was stolen by Harold Middlebrook. He, is an icon, and he's a leader in the community, and he made us all proud tonight.
To have Dr. Reverend Harold Middlebrook, who brings with him such a rich history and legacy of devotion to the cause.
A heartfelt presentation to the Harold Middlebrook Jr., well deserved. He's a historical legend. He's a civil rights icon.
I next want to introduce LaKenya Middlebrook to present our Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm so excited to have someone so special to the recipient to present it tonight. So LaKenya, if you wouldn't mind joining me.
Good evening. As Emily said, my name is LaKenya Middlebrook, and I say with great pride that I am a liberal. I'm a progressive, and I am a Democrat. It is an honor to be here tonight as we celebrate our shared beliefs and values, and hopefully are challenged to reflect those values in the hard work that we must do every day to ensure that our democracy continues to stand and that more Americans are empowered to thrive. As I stand here tonight, it is not lost on me that in the not too distant past, someone like me, an African American Southern woman, would likely not have been able to stand in this room for this purpose. If we are honest, our party has not always been on the right side of history regarding equality, equity, inclusion, and justice for every American. But many decades ago, we decided who we wanted to be, and we continue to work to ensure that every includes those traditionally cast as others. We don't always get it right away, but we are grateful for those in our party who sustain our moral center and hold us accountable to what we believe. When all that we value seems to be under attack, it is as important as ever that we look to those in our communities who have blazed the trail for justice, equality, and righteousness. I often say that we are now in a time when a movement is required. Fortunately, we have pioneers in our community who have stood and marched and protested and advocated and organized and persisted and insisted that our country move toward liberty and justice for all, and have set the example for the power of a movement. I am personally grateful that my first and best teachers of the power and necessity of civic participation were my parents. We were raised to understand that freedom is not free, that countless numbers of people, including some in our own household, gave themselves to the struggle for equality, that our voices are valuable, that it is our duty to participate civically and socially, and that we cannot afford to be absent or silent. We were taught to take ownership of our citizenship and to stand when the powers that be insisted that you bow, to sit boldly when they tell you that you are not welcome, and to vote always. Those lessons were clear and that example was glaring. Others sacrificed, fought, stood, marched, and were arrested, threatened, beaten, and tormented for the right to exist as full citizens. And it is our responsibility to unapologetically exist in the spaces they fought for us to occupy. Someone laid the path for me, and I must honor that work by walking it. Many great heroes have names and faces we will never know, but their sacrifice and service impacts us daily. Sacrifice and service are the purest expressions of love and courage. And while many of us look to books and TV and movies for heroes, I was fortunate that I just had to look down the hall or across the dinner table or to the other end of the couch. Born July 4th in segregated Memphis, Tennessee, and given a name that means noble warrior, it would seem that he was destined to be a freedom fighter. Harold Albert Middlebrook attended segregated schools, lived in segregated neighborhoods, and grew up in a society that systemically treated him as a second-class citizen. However, he grew up believing that he was somebody and that all people deserved to be treated fairly and justly. As a high school student at Booker T. Washington High School in Memphis, young Harold participated in sit-ins to attempt to desegregate public libraries. As a student at Morehouse College in Atlanta, he participated in demonstrations and sit-ins to desegregate lunch counters. It was during these demonstrations that he met and dialogued with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the leadership of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and was inspired to commit himself fully to the fight for equality. He continued to participate in demonstrations and organizing with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and eventually became a project director for SCLC, where he organized, educated, and mobilized African Americans to fight for the ability to register to vote and have access to the ballot box. Reverend Middlebrook risked his life and his livelihood in places like Selma and Tuscaloosa and Danville, Virginia, and countless places that most of us had never heard of, to give voice to those who had been systematically silenced and to fight alongside those others tried to render powerless. By the late 1960s, he had returned to his beloved Memphis and was active in supporting labor and continuing the fight for justice for the racially, socially, and economically oppressed. In 1968, as a member of the Strategy Committee of Community on the Move for Equality, he helped to arrange for Dr. King to come to support the sanitation workers' strike organized by the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. On April 4th, 1968, he stood on the parking lot of the Lorraine Motel as his mentor and friend was assassinated. Reverend Middlebrook did not let tragedy or fear or anger or rage or frustration overtake him. He continued and continues to demand justice, equality, and fairness for the oppressed, the underserved, and the underrepresented. When he came to Knoxville in the late 1970s, he brought his warrior spirit with him. He was instrumental in organizing the Martin Luther King Jr. celebration in Knoxville and served as the chair of the MLK Commemoration Commission for a number of years. In the early 1990s, he and others took legal action against Knox County schools on my behalf to attempt to prevent desegregation efforts that overwhelmingly displaced Black and poor students from schools in their neighborhoods. He was heavily involved in the push for police accountability to the community, which led to the development of the Police Advisory and Review Committee in our city. Whether through his pastoral service, his work with the Knox County Democratic Party, the Knoxville Interdenominational Christian Ministerial Alliance, the NAACP, the Knoxville Area Urban League, the Children's Defense Fund, and a host of other organizations' efforts and causes, what is clear is that Reverend Middlebrook loves people, he loves justice, and he loves freedom enough to commit his entire self to ensuring that none exists without the other. He is a noble warrior, he is a freedom fighter, he is an organizer, he is a foot soldier, he is a man. He has committed a lifetime to working for us, and for that we are better and we are grateful.
Seldom in my life I've really been surprised and honored. Doubly surprised when one lives at one's own daughter. The struggle is not mine. It belongs to all of us. It belongs to those who dare to stand up. It belongs to those who would dare, like our former mayor, to give you a chance to serve. It belongs to those whose names are not known, but who keep on struggling, who keep on fighting. And so as I stand to accept this award, I stand not for myself, but I stand for the countless, the thousands, all of those like Theodis Robinson, all of those who over the years have given so much to the cause, to the struggle. But let me say to you, the struggle is not over. The battle is not yet won. It will not be won until we can stand and know that we will not have a person in the White House who dares try to separate us and to keep us from loving and sharing with one another. And so as we stood in the streets around this country, I am convinced anew, thank you, Emily, I am convinced anew we shall overcome. We shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe, I'm convinced we shall overcome. Amen. And we're going to move those out of the way in the Senate, in the White House, amen, in the Congress, amen, or anywhere else who dares to tell us that we cannot walk hand in hand, amen, that we cannot share together, that we cannot give of ourselves so that our unborn children will know that there is a nation, yes, a nation who will show this world that we can walk together. Amen. And so I say to you Democrats in this room, walk together, children. Yes, yes. Don't you get weary. Walk together. Walk together, children. Don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land.
Proud to announce that with a generous contribution by Mayor Madeline Ropero, the Knox County Democratic Party will be donating $1,000 to the Children's Defense Fund in Reverend Middlebrook's name. It's not every day that you get to meet a living legend. It's not every day that you get to meet someone who helped create this legacy of civil rights. And I am so honored to be on stage with you. And thank you for being one of our board members.
I think it was the best Truman Day dinner I've ever attended, and I have been to dozens of them. I mean, literally dozens, and I think this is the best. And one of the reasons it was the best was the award given at the end to Reverend Harold Middlebrook. Those of us who've been in Knoxville a while, who've been involved in the civil rights struggle, as I have been for, well, really since 1964, know what a role he played and what a leader he was and what a soldier he was. He's a remarkable American, and he made us, all of us, think once again what it meant to be an American and how we've got to recapture that.
Well, so why don't you tell us how you got involved, how this came about that your dad was able to receive this award for the Lifetime Achievement?
Yeah, absolutely. The party chair, Emily Gregg, had a discussion with me, and she said, you know, we are just really, really inspired by the work that Reverend Middlebrook does in the community, that he does for the party, and, you know, looking into his history and really understanding the impact that he's made across this country for, you know, several decades, and not even realizing a lot of times that the person you're sitting across the table from or meeting with has been as involved as he has. And, you know, she really expressed that a lot of people in the community don't know the full breadth of the contributions that he's made, and with, you know, all the support that he's given to the party and all the work that he continues to give to the party, that it was only fitting to honor him tonight for all the work that he's done and continues to do, and, you know, that he's literally committed his lifetime to achieving justice and equality for all people. And so it was fitting to give him the Lifetime Achievement Award.
How are we still here fighting the same fight that you fought with Martin Luther King so many years ago? Can you tell me?
Life is a cycle, and it goes around and around. The pendulum swings back and forth. And so if you're not careful and people don't learn from the past, then you're subject to make the same mistake. I tell people all the time, if you don't know your history, you can't appreciate your present, and you have no sense of direction for the future. And one of the things that keeps happening is, in America, in the United States, we don't learn the lesson. And so we keep making the same. I was amazed the other day that in 1924, the President of the United States signed a bill that wanted to make America, the United States, look like it looked in 1890, which meant they wanted it to be white, blue-eyed. And here we are, you know, 2017, with a new president, but the same kind of stuff going on. That if we don't understand where we've been, then we're not going to get much further. And one of the things that disturbs me is that people never seem to grasp it. We're either going to stick together or we're going to remain stuck. I tell people all the time, together we stick, divided we're stuck. And so what's happening to us is a number of years ago, after we created the Martin Luther King celebration, a young man from Halls called me, kept me on the phone for about 2.5, 3 hours, criticizing us for having a celebration around the life of Martin Luther King. And then he finally said to me that he was a card-carrying Ku Klux Klan and that he was a skinhead. He was a sophomore. 2 years later, an African-American family moves into Halls, and they're putting tacks and nails in the driveway. They're tearing down the mailbox. And the kids at the school, a little young man from our church, in at the school, and the white kids would have him to sit at their table, and they would say to people, "This is our little chocolate baby." And so it said to me that if this young man was in the 10th grade, if that system and that thought pattern were perpetuated in his upbringing, in his mind, then in 2017, he would be one of those who would be carrying the cross, who would be doing the chants. And so somehow we've got to reach people at all levels and say to them, none of us can rise until all of us rise. None of us can be better until all of us are better. And that if we teach our children the negatives in life, then they're going to grow up continuing this same cycle that we've been going through all these years. And so it's frightening to me. It's frightening to me that and especially when I see it coming from the White House and from the Congress, that the masses of the people who think like that are now empowered and encouraged to follow through on that same kind of teaching.
How would you say that we interrupt that? What would be?
Well, I think number one, you've got to have a real teaching mechanism. I think, you know, we're talking now at our State Department of Education about eliminating any period of history that had to do with civil rights, that had to do with slavery, that had to do with the Civil War. Well, if you take that away from folk and you don't teach them so they can be better. So it starts in the home, it starts in the school, it starts in the church. And until we get to that point, then we can continue having gatherings like this, where a few of us who mean right are gathering together to celebrate. But we still left and lost all of those people who have not yet been educated into. I never shall forget on one of Oprah Winfrey's early shows, she had a man who was a Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and his wife and his daughter, and their little baby, his little grandbaby. Because he was under lawsuit, he couldn't come up on the stage. He sat in the audience, dressed in his regalia, and he said, "The happiest day of my life was when my grandson made his first words, and his first words were nigger, nigger." And he was taking joy in it until we can eliminate and help people. I don't know that we'll ever eliminate it, but until we can help people to get beyond that mentality.
As a student of history myself, you know, one of the things that I think we have to understand in our country, number one, we have to be honest about our history and our legacy and the truth of that, of how we've gotten where we are and the impact, the very real impact that it's had. But I think that there are some class and income factors, you know, and one of the things early on in our nation, race was used as a tool to separate people who were in similar economic circumstances, so that, you know, poor white citizens were given a higher status than enslaved simply because of their race. But when you look at their economic situation and circumstances, they weren't much better off.
Sometimes they were worse.
Sometimes, you know, they weren't much better off. The difference was they could move about as freely as they wanted to, but they didn't have the resources or the income to really go anywhere or do anything, and they were kind of beholden to that situation too. But that was ingrained in us as a society, and it became systemic, so that now moving forward, race is an issue. And you have people who have resentment and hatred, who are of all economic backgrounds, because it's something that has been ingrained in us. And the reality of it is, like I said, it requires us being honest with ourselves. The reality of it is that our country, from its very inception, was a lot of its founding was based on the oppression of any number of people, whether it was, you know, people who were indigenous to this country, whether it was, you know, various immigrant groups, even though we all, you know, I always say, most of us were immigrants. Some of us, like our people, were imports. You know, we came here as goods, not as people. But you know, there has been oppression that has been systemic and has played its part in the success of our country. And until we're honest about that and come to a reckoning about it, we're not going to get past it, and we're going to keep going through these cycles that Dr. Middlebrook was just talking about, where we put a Band-Aid on it and we heal a little bit and we, you know, come together and we move forward, and then 20, 30, 50 years from now we find ourselves going through the same cycles over again because we haven't gotten to the root of the issue and really had a real reckoning with who we are, with, you know, the real impact of who we've been and how we balance who we have been and who we are with who we want to be.
Why do you think that we're so, why do you think that as a nation we like to try to deny about what happened with
it's uncomfortable.
slavery?
It's uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable. It's very, very uncomfortable to admit that you did a horrible thing.
And it did not just start with us.
Right.
You have to remember that everybody who came to this country initially, in the first group, and there were some African Americans in the group, were all indentured servants. And so you start out trying to enslave Native Americans. And when we look at Native Americans, indigenous Americans, who are now on the reservations, we get a sense of anger. And, you know, we really get a sense of anger because we put them on the reservations thinking that we were really relegating them to a negative lifestyle, and then we discovered that they had the oil. And so you really get frustrated. So when they would not be enslaved, you turn to the next group of people of color that you can identify. And constantly we are reminded that we cannot rise to the level of where we ought to be until you see, you can't go up and you are not keeping me in the ditch. Because if you go up, I'm coming out of the ditch with you. And the desire would be, let's rise because of our skin complexion, but let's leave the rest of them in the hole. That will not happen. And so there is that sense of guilt, that sense of fear, that my lifestyle and my position of authority will be challenged if everybody is on the same plane. Well, I think we have to really develop. W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the talented tenth. And what he was really talking about was if people of both colors, of all nationalities, could really just start talking to each other, start sharing with each other, and start seeing the worth of every human being and of every individual, we could perhaps come to appreciate who we are. And so it seems to me that we're going to have to teach our children, expose our children to the fact that we're in a time now when we must share with each other. And remember, together we stick, divided we're stuck.
I love that metaphor of yours. I love to hear it. So thank you so much for sharing this evening with us, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Together we stick, divided we're stuck.